and I had a couple of people stop me. Yeah, and I didn't want to tell them to bugger off. I've got a CA meeting instead, so that's why I wasn't with you earlier. I can't hear you, Greg. You're on mute.
Your item came up, so I wanted to let them know what was
That's fine. That's I went in the city centre. It was a lovely morning.
I'm getting relief from digging my garden at the moment by being upstairs.
Hi Andy, it's David Stevens from Sandwell. Just to let you know, Maria Crompton can't join us today on the call.
Okay, I was expecting her to, but not to worry. So are you, my apologies, is anyone representing her?
I haven't got anybody else to join, Andy. It's just David. Okay, all right, understand. Okay. I was going to welcome her for her first meeting then, but we will not do that. Right, I think 11:01, so we'll make a start then if everybody's there, ready and waiting. I think I can see lots of the people I'm expecting and 35 faces I can't see, so it looks as though that's all right. And as we did last time, obviously with a big meeting, we'll go relatively slowly. And if you want to contribute, please put your hand up so that I know. Okay, so first of all, apologies for absence. We've just heard obviously that Maria Crompton, the new leader for Sandwell, is not able to be with us. And then other apologies I've had: Tom Wesley from the Black Country LEP, Nick Abel from Coventry and Warwickshire LEP, and then George Adamson from Cannock, and Sean Davis from Telford. If there are any other apologies, perhaps you could just send them directly into Tim or Dan rather than us holding up while everyone contributes in now. That would be great. Number 2, declarations of interest. I don't think there are any of those notified in advance, and I don't think anyone's showing a hand to raise anything. Number 3, the minutes of the meeting of the 5th of June. They're all there in the time-honoured way. I'll just pause to see if anyone wants to make any comments on them. Again, not seeing any hand written coming up, so that's great. Thank you very much. Item number 4, the forward plan. That is all there as well. So we won't dwell on that unless anyone wishes to. Again, not seeing any hands. And number 5, the chair's remarks. There are just 3 there. Of course, I was going to welcome Maria. I should also, of course, thank Councillor Yvonne Davis, the former leader of Sandwell and the portfolio lead for public service reform, for her dedication to the combined authority over her period as leader, and indeed for what she did for her borough. And then the second thing is obviously to thank Adam Norburn, Executive Director for Rugby, his last meeting before he leaves the authority. And then a little bit of good news. I've had an email in from David Lane, Chairman of the Audit and Risk Committee. We don't have that committee on the agenda for today. Just to say a quick note to advise that a quorum meeting of ARAC approved the annual accounts at today's meeting. So that concludes all of that process. So thank you for that as well. Not got any other announcements unless anyone wants to ask anything. Hands up. No, in which case, first substantive item then is number 6, economic recovery in the West Midlands. And obviously I am going to pass to Councillor Ian Brookfield to lead this piece. And I think you will then pass some of the executive, Ian. So Ian, over to you.
I'm going to pass it on to who, Mr. Mayor, did you say?
In time to a member of the executive, but you first.
Oh, right, okay. Listen, thanks very much, and not perhaps not the easiest paper that we'll ever see, but an honest paper. Many people, perhaps on this call already, will have read the report, and it's a comprehensive report. Probably most people will have lived through it, so we'll know many of the items and issues we speak about. But I would urge, you know, if you haven't had the opportunity to go through the whole report and the state of the region, it gives an honest account of where we were, and we were in a decent place before COVID-19 joined us. and then it gives us an outline of what we've been through and what we've done, and then talks about next steps. You know, we have had and continue to have a devastating loss of life, and it's caused a massive seismic shock over the last 5 months. I suppose if you ever needed a combined authority, you know, this is probably one of this would be a rationale if it ever needed one, you know, for people to come together, not just the authorities, the CA, but also our businesses and communities as well. And, you know, let's be honest, it's our responsibility. It's not going to be anybody else's to steer us through the recovery and absolutely ensure that nobody is left behind. I think we've said through all this, the key to the recovery is maintaining business and consumer confidence by acting quickly. And through the report, you can see that action of acting quickly. It's perhaps a new way of working for many of us. It's not without its grumbles, its moans, its fights. But at the end of the day, they're all for a good reason, and they're all for to take us through this particular crisis. So we welcome debate. Most of us are politicians or have worked in the public sector. We've all got one thing in common. You know, we want to do the very best that we can for our area. Now, the report ties up several pieces of work on the economic recovery. You've got the State of the Region report, which tells our story of the economy of the second half of 2019, and like I said before, in a decent place. We know we still had challenges. We know we still had hotspots, whether that was unemployment, youth unemployment. David Jameson's on. You know, we've had issues of crime. You know, and they will always continue. But it gives an honest account, and then the impact of the pandemic. Like I think the speedy action of authorities, CA, and business leaders, you know, has put us into good place, and it shows you some of the decisions that we've taken to put in effective emergency economic measures, you know, which we did, business grants, rates holidays, government on the furlough scheme, but also highlighted, as we had our weekly meetings, and if not more than weekly meetings, highlighted where there were gaps in support. Now, if we could talk just very quickly, I'm not going to go through all 100 pages. You'll be pleased. Some of us would like to have a weekend, so it's just an overview. I mean, I'll be absolutely honest. The leadership shown by civic and business leaders, I think, has been inspirational in helping us set out our priorities for the recovery. And if you look at that £3.2 billion of ask and recharging the West Midlands economy, listen, if it all comes off, I'll be the first one running up and down Wolverhampton, and thanking everybody. We're starting to see some of the green shoots of that, and that will be important. We need to lead the way. We need to show the community out there that we're ready to go, able to go, and able to deliver. So a lot of the report speaks about that. And then we talk about the next steps. We have to. We've started a process, and we're talking about vital projects, but we've got to sustain the momentum on this. We'll probably be as busy now the next 6, 12, 18 months as we were over the previous 4 months, because such is the importance. We cannot leave anybody behind. We know we're going to have issues with unemployment, etc. And whatever we need to do, we need to commit ourselves as a region to be able to do that. We will keep our intelligence as being good, and I'd like to thank the WM Ready, etc. Because we're going to have to look at new consumer and business behaviours. What's gone in previous will not be the same going forward. So we've got to be able to be fleet of foot to be able to help those particular businesses, because without the businesses, we all suffer. Without jobs, communities suffer. So it's absolutely vital as we go forward. And finally, just to thank, whilst doing this and the issues that we had, you know, we still have a foundational economy. We still have people, shop assistants, logistics, restaurant staff. You know, many have played a key role, but they'll never be on a call like this. You know, but without them doing their jobs, posties. I was a postie once, so I'm going to stand up to that. You know, without people like these, carers, nurses, police, etc., we'd have been in a worse position. So at the end of all this, we must certainly remember the people that helped us get us through. So I'm happy to move the recommendations, welcome any comments, but urge people to look again at this report, look at the state of the region, look at what we've done, and hopefully agree with us that so far, so good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So I think there's an invitation for any responses to that, and the first hand I see is the Commissioner, David Jameson. David.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and can I welcome Ian's report as well. I unapologetically will keep making the point that the social consequences of COVID-19 and the difficulties that will result from that, we should be taking strongly into consideration. And I still think the paper perhaps a little light on that still, and it may be something we need to come back to. The consequences, particularly for young people, and I'm really pleased to see that young people are a thread throughout this 100-page report. They are going to be considerable. It is older people who disproportionately be affected by their health, but it'll be younger people who are going to be disproportionately affected by the economy and the social effects of COVID-19. And this will not just be in the narrow area of the combined authority. It'll be for the wider area roundabout. From our colleagues from other areas, will be facing in different ways very similar problems to which we have here. But it does look at the moment as if those children, particularly and young people from ethnic minorities and some in the poor areas, are going to be affected disproportionately. And that's something that we just cannot ignore. We ignore it at our peril if we do that, because it'll create lots of problems for the future. The document is a good document, and it highlights many things, and there's some good programs put in the document, which is good. I think we're a bit less clear on what the activity is going to be. What are the actual practical things that are going to be done? And I'm concentrating, because my concerns mainly are to do with crime and young people who are not employed or have not had their full education may then be drifting into crime, and there's some evidence of that already. I think we need to be very specifically looking at programs that are really focused on those youngsters, particularly those 18, 24, 25-year-olds, getting them into work. And then the other area that really concerns me, that we're building up for the near future, is a cohort of young people who have missed out on their education of at least 6 months, and it's not completely clear yet whether all children are going to get full-time education in September, which I hope they do, but this may not be possible for some children. That is going to have an enormous effect on those young people's employability in the future, and hence the sort of things that they might be drawn into. And crime, of course, is one of the considerations. So I think there is some money. I don't think that's referenced in the paper, but there's some money that's going to be available. I think £650 million across the country is going to be available to schools. It is very difficult for us to get a handle on this as to what's being done because of the fragmented control of schools now. Local authorities don't have the same authority. In fact, most secondary schools, I think, are now outside the remit of local authorities. And just one last thing. I mean, I am employing, in the next 3 years, the police will be taking on about 3,000 police officers. And we are very actively working locally to promote those jobs with young people. And I have said, and I think you probably heard me say in the media, I have said that 1/3 of those, 1,000 of those jobs, should be to our BME population, which actually for the West Midlands is about the number of people we have, about the proportion that we have. So I am going about this very, very strongly indeed. And we're pursuing this relentlessly to make sure that we get local people, local youngsters, and that we employ more of those people from some of our ethnic minority communities. So there are, Mr. Mayor, I will keep beefing on about it so long as I have blood in my veins, and because I think the social consequences in the end are going to be some of the most important. But I appreciate the economic solutions presented here take us part of the way there.
Thank you very much. And does anybody else want to come in? Because I do just want to respond to David and how we might take this forward. But let me just see if there are other hands first. I'm sure Councillor Brookfield will want to as well. Any other hands? Yes, lovely. Is he second? Is he?
Andy. Thank you, Andy. Just unmuting. It takes so long, doesn't it? There were just a couple of things in the paper, which I think is a really good starting point as well. On page 33, we've got a section that's got a number of boxes which look at strengths and weaknesses. And I guess that the area of concern for me in particular is around the automotive sector and any concerns about the future that might have. You know, in my own case, you know, JLR are obviously a big supplier, big provider, and the food chain that has sort of built up around it, which is such an important part of our business economy, and in fact on our design and all the work that universities do to support them as well. So I'm just wondering whether we should be putting something in about the importance to Britain of the automotive sector in this part of the world and the history that it has as well, which is quite important. And I wanted to pick up just a little bit for the Police and Crime Commissioner on his concerns around people having mental health issues, and also Ian talked about it. This is something that we picked up at the Wellbeing Board as well, and in particular trying to do a piece of work to understand their confidence in the future and how this is going to impact on our workforce as well. So really looking at the area and the partners supporting people with mental health. So we've got that one as well, and thank you, Ian, for bringing it up.
Thank you, Izzy. I don't know if it's not the same as in the room. You can't see exactly who's on the line. I don't know if Lee Barron is on the line. If he is, Lee, would you just like to take the opportunity of responding to Councillor Seckham over the automotive sector and what we've been doing and what we intend to do? I'll just let you put your hand up and I'll pass to Ian Courts next. But Lee, if you're there, it'd be great. Ian. Councillor Courts, I think you were next on hands.
OK, right. OK, I'm sorry, I've suffered a couple of outages, so I disconnected a couple of times. And I'm not sure that I heard all of what Izzy says, but I might be duplicating a little bit. But could I just refer to the, the paper which includes the SWOT analysis, and it talks about strengths and opportunities of the region. And I mean, I appreciate that, a lot of these things are, generalities, but I do think it's, we should be much stronger on the economic assets we have in the region. There's the airports mentioned, but the NEC, the JR, there are many assets there that, need our support. That's the first thing. And in terms of consideration, economic strategy. But of course, in terms of opportunities, you would think, where is HS2 on this? It happens to be in my portfolio, but in fact, it's an enormous project that is one of the most important in the region. And really, again, it's missed off here. And I'm afraid it really needs putting centre, as indeed you did in the pitch that you put to government, where those things were made.
Fair point. Next hand I saw was Councillor Slay.
Yeah, thank you. I fully support the paper. I think it gives a very clear understanding of where we are in the West Midlands, what's been done by way of government support, and what the state of the West Midlands is. I want to pick up a couple of points that David Jameson's made, which I totally agree with, and that is we need to ensure we support young people back into work and to maintain any employment they may currently have. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there's a one-off support scheme that governments have announced, about £272 million to put people into training and into wage subsidies. And I know David and I have both called for that in the past. And of course, there are other monies that have come through from government, which may not be in the report, which talk about how we're going to improve our college facilities, for instance. You know, National Career Service has some more money going into there. So I think there's quite a lot of funding that is coming down to do exactly what we all want, and that's to make sure young people are not impacted disproportionately. Because one of the things we do know is, and I've made the point before, a lot of our young people are competing in the jobs market for people who are not going to have jobs but who have higher skill base, and that's going to be a really difficult situation for young people as we go forward. And you know, I think it's very important this combined authority consistently delivers those messages, and I know that is being done. Just on the point that Izzy made with regard to mental health, the combined authority itself supports quite a lot of mental health initiatives. We support the Mental Health Commission, and David again put some money into that, and the Norman Lamb. We this week had a further report on the West Midlands productivity, the mental health productivity pilot, which is being sponsored by Midlands Engine, but supported by Coventry University, West Midlands Combined Authority, and Mind, and that has been given further support. I think we've got something like 500 companies who've signed up to the West Midlands mental health productivity pilot to make sure they understand what the impact is on their employees and with regard to productivity impacts through mental illness. So we are doing a very substantial amount of work. The combined authority itself, the members may not know of those programs. So I think if you don't, you do need to look at them and see what's being done, not least Thrive at Work and Thrive at Home, both of which are extremely important programs. That's what I really want to say, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other hands, so let me pass back to Councillor Brookfield for any responses to what's heard.
Yeah, I'll just a couple of quick responses, and then I'd hope you allow Julia to come in and say a few words, if that's okay. I mean, David, absolutely no. Keep banging the drum, mate. You're absolutely right. There are issues that we've got to take account of. But let me just tell you about what the authorities do. They are also doing community recovery planning as well. So whilst not specifically highlighted, we're going to use the same data set for economic and community, but you're quite right. The two are inextricably linked. We know that, and you know we'll need to highlight that as we certainly go on. So not an issue, but you continue to see that. Ian, you know, we talk about the SWOT analysis. Yeah, fair comments. You know, there's comment. You know, we can put more stuff in. We can take more stuff out. We could put opportunities and threats. You can actually put automotive in the same in both boxes. You know, we you know there's a thing there. Have we got too many eggs in one basket? Is that a threat? Is that an opportunity? Being owned by foreign firms, is that an opportunity? Is that a threat? So it depends how far you actually want to go in the SWOT analysis. But I take your point. And you know, we have some key major infrastructure, West Midlands one, that we need to keep banging on about. So absolutely no problem with that as well, Ian. You know, and keep saying it. Julia, is there anything else that I certainly missed? I probably missed loads, but there you go.
No, not at all. I would just really emphasise the fact that this is just trying to draw the strands together to a lot of work happening within the region and in central government on both sides of that. This is a very fast moving and fluid situation. So what we're just trying to do is, for the purposes of kind of accountability and transparency with the board, just try and put that all in one place and show how it connects together. We're moving quickly on with next steps, and a key priority for us is just ensuring that we deliver the West Midlands recharge document that was submitted to government earlier in the summer, alongside refreshing our vision, strategy and plans. And we had a good session at said board yesterday to start putting the flesh on the bones terms of that. As Councillor Slay and others have said, there have been a number of government announcements. We can provide more information on how they all fit together, but again, this continues to move at pace. So the paper references the submission to the Get Britain Building Fund. That work was still underway at the point at which papers were circulated. That submission has now gone in, and we are hoping for an announcement on the conclusion of that shortly. And I will leave it at that. I'd also just like to add my thanks to the ODA, Rebecca Riley and WM Reddy, who have done a great job, not just in putting together the state of the region, but for the work they do weekly for Economic Impact Group, just making sure we've got a really rich source of data to inform our plans that's as close to real time as possible. And that has been fantastically helpful, not just informing our economic recovery work, but also in supporting the community recovery planning. So it puts us on a really good basis to ensure that they are very, very closely aligned and reinforce one another.
Okay, thank you. In which case, and if I don't see any other contributions, I'm not going to read them out. The recommendations are on page 15 and 16 of the pack, as the Councillor Brookfield said. So I hope they are accepted. And the way we'll do this throughout is just put up your hand if there's any objections to that, basically. Otherwise, we will assume so. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. In which case, we come to item number 7 of the agenda, which is the financial monitoring report. So I will, of course, hand over to the Deputy Mayor. Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You have to bear with me because it's quite a long report and it does need some discussion, I think. So it starts on page 107 for those who are trying to pick it up on the screen. So this is the first full financial monitoring report of the authority for the current financial year. It sets out spend to date to the 31st of May, but more importantly highlights the initial estimates of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the authority's financial position, both in the current year and medium term. As the report states, it's an almost impossible task currently to predict the likely impact with any certainty on our finances, given the external context and emerging government thinking and advice. The financial and economic context is set out in section 6 of the report. But since drafting the report, the government has now confirmed that mayoral combined authorities will be able to access, as your local authorities are, 75 pence in the pound of lost income above the 5% base. And therefore, this will reduce the current forecast deficit position now reported. However, the extent is yet to become clear as further detailed eligibility criteria is awaited, rather guidance is awaited. The current financial year forecast is set out in section 7 of the report with a revenue deficit of £11.1 million estimated as set out in paragraph 7.4 and confirmed in table 2. As detailed, it's clear that transport is driving the highest cost pressures and revenue losses. The government has already stepped in with funds to cover income loss on light rail and tendered bus services to the 3rd of August, and officers continue to work with government through both MHCLG and DFT to secure further funding help. The immediate action being undertaken by the executive team is set out in paragraph 7.8 of the report, which I think is key, to bring the expenditure back within budget by September, and I believe that we will achieve this by September, CM Board, both with the measures set out at further government funding. And just to reassure members of the combined authority, we have been discussing this matter with a senior leadership team, both the Mayor and I, with the Chief Executive, very much in our minds, and I will be meeting in the Mayor's absence next week with Deborah Cadman, the Chief Executive, to discuss how the work programmes go forward from this point. Without passing, I want to say that, of course, we have balanced over the last 3 years, and much of the report does need to be seen in the context of COVID-19. I don't think there's any leader who's on this call today who is probably not facing some of the same challenges with their own budgets going forward. In terms of the medium-term financial position, section 8 details how the position has moved since that reported in February 2020. The last 5-year estimates are set out in table 4, paragraphs 8.5. Actions underway to close this gap are set out in paragraphs 8-10 of the report, along with ongoing discussions with governments in relation for the need for a sustainable funding solution for mayoral combined authorities going forward. Deliberate choices within available funding options will be discussed with the leaders over the summer, and an update budget, as I've said, will be brought back to leaders in the financial report in September. The report sets out current capital expenditure plans and investment programme status update. Initial assessment of current capital resource shows an emerging potential pressure on scheme costs as a result of COVID-related impacts. This is being closely monitored in light of the emerging picture and availability of additional government funding, although further actions to prioritise capital spending plans within the available funding envelope cannot currently be ruled out in the short term. In summary, therefore, an emerging, complex and constantly changing picture which is being closely managed and monitored. An update will be brought through leaders in terms of additional cost pressures, income losses and government financial assistance to inform a discussion on the delivery choices within funding scenarios in the medium term. From the work underway by the executive team, I have a degree of confidence, in fact a high degree of confidence, that the current year deficit will be managed within available resources. And as I said, we are working on that basis and with that assumption going forward. But the matter is very much in hand. I want to give every member of this board the assurance that the Mayor, myself, Chief Executive and Senior Leadership team are working very hard to deal with the situation that we currently face. That concludes my report, Mr. Mayor. You have the recommendations. I'm assuming you'll be putting those after the debate.
Indeed.
Ready to take any questions.
So there we are. There's the invitation. Any observations or questions? Deputy Mayor's given a very clear view, and I see first-hand Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have on the forward plan a monitoring report coming to us in November. I just wondered whether, in actual fact, we could, between now and then, put these proposals to our 151 officers group, and so we can see a list at that November meeting of the Section 114 mitigation measures that are being put forward.
If I can answer, I'll call on Linda Horn, maybe she wants to support this, that we are not recommending that we implement Section 114 at this point in time within the combined authority. I think you understand that. There are ongoing discussions with governments, and that does give us an opportunity to do that. I also didn't mention that there is work through the FDs within the combined authority on an ongoing basis to understand the complexity and the challenges within the budget. But there's no reason why, and I'll give this back to, say, to the Chief Executive and to Linda, why we can't actually bring more people into that if so needed, particularly the Section 151 officers, who I think actually are probably the FDs anyway. So that's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. And I do see Linda's hand. So, Linda.
Hi, yeah, it was just to confirm really that I am confident that I have an outline plan in hand to bring this back within budget by the time we bring a financial report back to committee in September. And just to reassure members that actually the Section 151 officers of the 7 Mets and myself are meeting on a weekly basis, and we are discussing this and the CA's position on a continual basis, and this report and the position has been they've been fully cited on that, and I've agreed to work with them. We'll have a constant dialogue throughout the summer before we get to the September board report, so they're fully cited. I just wanted to give that assurance.
Yep. Can I just go back to Councillor Bird, see if you're comfortable with what you've heard there?
Yes, I think it's important that the Section 151 officers in all of the Mets are engaged in this process. What I don't want to do is pay lip service to them, because they have an integral part to play. So I'm comfortable at the moment. You'll know if I'm not.
Indeed so. All right, next to Councillor Ward.
Thank you. I think that the impact that we've seen over the last 15 or 16 weeks during the lockdown arising from the pandemic has led to financial issues, not just for the Combined Authority, but of course for the Met authorities as well. And in many ways, I think the financial challenge that the Mets are facing is an acuter one than that faced by the combined authority. And it's very regrettable that the government have not lived up to their comments at the beginning of the lockdown when local government was promised do everything you need to do and we'll back you. And we've not seen that thus far. Those words are now ringing somewhat hollow, particularly in Birmingham, where we're facing this financial year a gap of some 60 million. That's £60 million as a result of the City Council reacting to the pandemic to keep people in Birmingham as safe as we possibly could, but not being recompensed fully by the government. And as the report sets out in paragraph 6.5, all of this is exacerbated by 10 years of Tory government austerity, which has laid bare some of the inequalities of the pandemic, where people from deprived communities have been shown to be much more at risk of the virus than those elsewhere. And that period of austerity, of course, adds to the difficulty we're now going to face in aiding the recovery process from the pandemic. I have a couple of questions that I just wanted to ask around, first of all, paragraph 7.8 of the report, where I agree with what's proposed here: a review of staffing and recruitment activity, detailed review of discretionary spending. I think that's long overdue, and a review and reprioritising of the balance sheet. I hope that we as Met leaders will be kept informed and consulted as this process rolls forward. I have been hearing from elsewhere that alternative proposals have been put in place to review the combined authorities budget, and I'll not being consulted on those plans as far as I'm aware, and would have appreciated some consultation on those proposals. But it's more around the section in 8.10 or 8.10, where again I'm comfortable with the thrust here, but it's point 2 that concerns me a little bit, and that is the review of existing funding mechanisms, including the levels of constituent and non-constituent member contributions. Now, that's fine with me if it's going in the downward direction, but I suspect that's not going to be the case. And as I've already outlined, metropolitan authorities and indeed some of the non-constituent authorities are under extreme budgetary pressure as a result of reacting to the pandemic and doing all we can to keep our people safe, and then not being fully recompensed by the Conservative government. So we are now finding ourselves in somewhat of a difficult, and I appreciate 11 million for the combined authority is problematic, but I would ask that members appreciate that 60 million for Birmingham City Council is even more acute. So again, before anybody goes running off in the wrong direction with these recommendations in 8.10, I would appreciate that the Met leaders and indeed other leaders of the other non-constituent members are kept fully engaged and appraised of the direction of travel on these matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Slade, do you want to respond? I don't see any other hands. Sorry, I should have said so. Do you want to respond to what you've heard?
Yeah, a couple of points. If you read the report, of course, you'll recognise it's the revenue implications, particularly around transport, that's hit us particularly hard from the COVID perspective, and also the extra burden monies, which obviously we've had to expend. But I think picking up Councillor Ward's general point, there'll be no decisions taken, of course, by anyone. They'll all be taken by the leaders at the end of the day. We're just doing this piece of work to make sure we understand how the organisation functions and ensuring it's sustainable going forward. So I think at this point in time, we're taking all the issues into one forum, that is with the senior leadership team, chief executive, myself as a finance lead. But yes, at every opportunity, Councillor Ward, I think you can rest assured we'll keep the leaders, both constituents and non-constituent, fully informed of some of the work. And it will come back in September, as the report clearly states. So I hope that's assurance enough for you at this stage.
And then I do see Councillor Bird again.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just to get a confirmation really that we do currently have a freeze on recruitment, because I'd hate to think that we're paddling around in financial dismay and then find that we continue to recruit people. Can I just have an assurance that that is not the case?
Yeah, Deborah?
Yes, Councillor Bird, we are looking at every single vacancy and taking a judgment about whether it's appropriate to recruit to that vacancy or not. You will know that some of the posts are aligned directly to money that we've received from government and therefore are committed to deliver on targets. But certainly those posts that are aligned to grants from the Mets are absolutely frozen. But we're very conscious there are things that we need to deliver on, and we will need capacity to do that. So where there is money externally from government to enable us to do that, we will progress, but we'll also review about whether they're appropriate or not.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not seeing any other colleagues want to come in. So I'll just say one thing before we move on, which is obviously Councillor Slayer said it extremely well, but we can all see from the report the gravity of the situation, and we have to take responsibility for this, as we all understand, hence the proposed actions over the next few months, and then we will obviously bring it back for collective decision making as ever. So with that in mind, page 107 has the recommendations. I presume that they are supported. Not seeing anyone against coming forward, in which case that's the case. In which case we go on to item number 8, which is the adoption of the revised single assurance framework, and back to Councillor Slay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This starts at page 137 within the report. I'm supported, I think, by Julia in this matter. I'm not too sure Tim Martin's with us today. So having an assurance framework is a condition of government funding for combined authorities, and is an important way in which we demonstrate the proper stewardship of public money. We're required to update our assurance framework to ensure that it is compliant with national government guidance. This report presents an enhanced and updated assurance framework for consideration and approval by the Combined Authority Board. Our existing assurance framework was created prior to the election of the Mayor in 2016 and now needs to be updated to incorporate improvements as a result of our experience of operating the framework. In particular, the revised framework addresses the need for projects to be developed at pace and to ensure that the expertise that is built up in our directorates is recognised for the revised project initiation processes. The assurance framework for consideration has been developed to ensure it reflects the accountability requirements of the WMCA, deliver compliance with government, national and local growth assurance frameworks, and deliver governance improvements accordingly. The assurance framework complies with MHCLG, DFT and DFE, and they have cleared this document as being compliant. And I've received an email this morning to say that a sign-up has been given by MHCLG, a couple of small amendments at page 21, which the government's team are picking up accordingly, and those will be incorporated but before the final approval is given. But they're very minor amendments, nothing fundamental. The single assurance frameworks will apply to all projects and programmes that place a financial liability on the WMCA and are not classed as BAU. It allows for consistent standards and considerations to be applied to all projects developed, whether they be investment programme or not. At the same time, the framework will be applied in a proportionate manner, bearing in mind the nature of the project, to ensure that the process is not over bureaucratic. I want to get that message across. If you actually look at what we're proposing here, there is a streamlining element. The new framework will see the replacement of TAP and IAG processes currently in operation, and more focused and tailored support for portfolios during the project development to streamline this important stage in the process. This will drive improvement in the standard of projects developed, whilst allowing portfolios to set the pace of development and approval rather than the old TAP and IAG processes. The investment board functionality will be enhanced as detailed within the report to ensure that it could better carry out its role in approval, monitoring and applying necessary controls. The single assurance framework will deliver a number of significant improvements to the way in which the WMCA operates, as detailed in the report. It's fully supported by the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee, the Investment Board, Strategic Leadership Team of the WMCA and the relevant government departments. I had a separate paper sent to me by the Investment Director, just by way of illustration. I think under the current processes, if an strategic outline business case, just as a matter of interest, could take through the current assurance process between 4 and 5 months to actually get through the system. The SAF proposals within this paper would reduce that timeline to between 6 and 12 weeks. And that's consistent then going through both the outline business case and the 4 business case requirements, if they are so required. And that's with the investments between the £5 and £20 million financial scale. So the point I'm trying to make is that this does streamline the processes. It's not an over bureaucratic enhancement. It actually reduces some of those processes through TAP and IAG to make sure that we do get our investment proposals through the system at pace. Mr. Mayor, I'll let you put the recommendation.
Thank you very much. I think you should be in sales, sir, with that pitch. So there we go. Right. So let me see. Are there any responses to this? I can't see any responses, so that's probably a good thing. In which case, the recommendations are on page 133 of the pack, and there are 3 approvals required there. And I take it as I'm not seeing anybody coming forward that is approved. So thank you very much. And indeed, thank you to the governance team and others who got us to that point. OK, thank you. In which case, item number 9 is entitled Equalities Update. And I'm pleased to say Councillor Bridget Jones, I think, has joined the meeting in goodly time for this. So, Councillor Jones.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So this paper we'd hoped initially to bring to the March board, but that was postponed, understandably, due to the coronavirus lockdown. We've taken the opportunity since then to update the report with more recent activities and updates. And whilst this report has been delayed, it feels actually at the moment more timely than ever. Since March, we have seen, sadly, that Black, Asian and minority ethnic and other disadvantaged communities have been hit the hardest by the health, social and economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Existing inequalities have been brought into horrendously sharp relief by what we've witnessed in the last few months. And we've seen at the same time the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and a public demand for change. These events and changing context have been reflected in the paper, and the work includes now a section on the report, includes a section now on the Black Lives Matter movement and outlines how the region's recovery work is beginning to be developed to take into account those disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 crisis. I also think that the fact the paper was drafted back in March is an important reminder that we need to address inequality. And this is not a new thing. It is a deeply ingrained challenge facing our communities, our region and our national society as well. So whilst we've updated the paper to reflect current events, there are 3 key asks of the board, which are the same as in March. So first of all, that's approving the introduction of a new WMCA modern slavery policy and endorsing the annual statement published in line with legislative requirements. Secondly, and very, very importantly, is the adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism, which is covered in paragraph 3.2. And then noting the progress on the delivery of the equality agenda within the West Midlands Combined Authority, including the WMCA response to Black Lives Matter. The paper is also a reminder that there's still much to do to embed inclusion and diversity in how we plan, decide and deliver, both as an organisation and as a region. And I'm not going to shy away from how we do this as the board as well. You've heard me talk before about representation around this table. We still have a situation where only 3 of the 15 voting members from constituent authorities plus the mayor are women. And to my knowledge, we still only have 3 Black, Asian or minority ethnic voting members of this board as well. And it is the duty of anybody that doesn't represent its area to ask why, to ask what we can do to address that, and to ask what we can do to hear the voices that aren't around the table to inform what we do. On everything I've talked about so far, we have engaged the Leadership Commission, and I know that there are discussions underway about refreshing and refocusing the Leadership Commission's membership, mission and activity to reflect recent events and context. The Commission are rightly revisiting and reiterating some of their original recommendations from 2018, and the world felt like a very different place. including challenging the combined authority to lead by example, bring more diverse leaders into its own organisations, networks and governance, and to embed inclusion and equality outcomes into its own strategic goals. Their original report highlighted the issue of having robust data and evidence around equality dimensions to inform our strategies. And this is particularly important as we plan our recovery for COVID-19. And as we've already seen from reports considered earlier, the impact that the pandemic has had in terms of deepening inequalities in this region. It's good to see that there will be a report coming to this board in November, I believe, on the regional health impact of COVID-19. Another of the recommendations from the Commission was to establish a young combined authority to provide the perspectives of under 25s in our region, because we are an incredibly young region. We continue to welcome the challenge provided by our Young Combined Authority, and they have recently written to the Combined Authority about Black Lives Matter. And with your permission, Chair, I would like to invite Iman and Olivia from the Young Combined Authority here today to read that letter out to the board.
With pleasure.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. I will now share a letter I sent to Deborah Gadwin, Chief Executive. This letter follows the Black Lives Matter statement which we, the Young Combined Authority, made on the 4th of June 2020. It acts on our commitment that it is not enough to say #Black Lives Matter, because this is not a moment, this is a movement. 1 month on, we are very aware that the focus on Black Lives Matter is beginning to fade. Mainstream and social media are already moving on. Our hope is that you'll be able to keep the need to address structural racism and disadvantage high on the region's agenda and work with other decision makers to translate increased awareness into meaningful action. Like us, those who stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement believe that the anger today is justified. Black communities have waited for centuries for their voices to be heard, and though significant changes are being made, simultaneously the same patterns of inequality are still being repeated. We have seen health inequalities exposing the vulnerability of Black, Asian and other mixed communities to the coronavirus pandemic, and how our country's slow response to the Windrush scandals have left many families with a tainted view of the United Kingdom. We do not want people's view of the West Midlands to be tainted in the same way. The West Midlands is one of the most diverse regions in this country. However, structural inequalities create conflict and division in our society. We need to better understand the root causes of racial disadvantage and the adverse impact it has on our young people and underrepresented communities. We need to recognise the impact on a person's confidence, self-worth and ability to grow. The impact on their faith and belief in the region that they live in if decision makers fail to resolve the issues that significantly shape their lives. We need to reassure our citizens that ethnic inequalities are unjustifiable. Civic leaders need to proactively address structural inequalities to ensure and echo the WMCA vision of building a healthier, happier, more prosperous and better connected West Midlands. To get there, decision makers in the West Midlands need to know what institutional racism actually means, how it looks, tastes and feels for young people in our region. My question is, do you know? For us, institutional racism is when Black parents have to move their children to a different nursery so they do not have to carry the burden of an unfair report all the way through education into childhood. It is being instantly put into the bottom set of secondary school and having to work your way up. It is starting your first Saturday job with older colleagues making comments about your appearance. It is failing interviews for jobs which you are overqualified to do. It is having Black friends in the legal sector that get stopped and searched disproportionately on their way to work. It is experiencing these injustices before you turn 18, before you turn 16. Structural inequality and institutional racism mean that no matter how well you do in your life, you do not have the agency to define your own identity or success. Once this is accepted and understood, focus can turn to what really needs to change. Representation is important. Young Black people need powerful Black role models to look up to. We strongly believe that diverse representation cannot be reduced to a tick box exercise. People need to be given a seat at the table for a reason, for their talent, their experience, their insights. But in the same way, political and other civic leaders are also there for a reason. Their purpose is to champion their communities, and in a region as diverse as ours, it is genuinely concerning that the makeup of our council chambers can still be described as male, pale and stale. So we think that
1. Public bodies should take positive action to build a more representative leadership for the West Midlands. We understand that it will not be easy or enough to change the makeup of boardrooms and cabinet tables, and as such. Number 2, current political and civic leaders should undertake bias training, which includes lessons or hearing from people who have lived with the experience of structural racism. And if possible, this should be extended to educators as well. Number 3, decision makers should speak to local Black people to understand the impacts and root causes of racial disadvantage. The way decisions are made are as important as those who make them. So we think that decision makers need to listen to their communities to understand how to best serve them. The Young Combined Authority was established on this principle. And if we can work closely together with leaders to promote more inclusive leadership. And finally, number 4, civic leaders need to build trust through accountability. And this means being honest about the issues and blind spots within your teams and organisations. Can everyone hear me properly? We also want to see effort and time put into helping young Black people in the West Midlands succeed. Decision makers can make this happen by, number 1, reviewing and, where necessary, refocusing all policy, funding and delivery to ensure that regional inequalities are being tackled. And number 2, making sure that all new policies explicitly reference inequality and all new activity is designed to be accessible and address disadvantage. While addressing inequality needs to be embedded across all the work in the West Midlands, there are 2 policy areas which we think are particularly important to address. Number 1, education and school exclusions. Learning is a basic right, and yet too many young people are let down, fall out of the education system. If structural inequalities are to be addressed, education must be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Creating a space to talk about Black Lives Matter in schools, universities and colleges is a start. And the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus pandemic, as Councillor Bridget Jones mentioned earlier, we know that Black, Asian and mixed race communities have been hit the hardest during this pandemic. So how will this be addressed? By sharing these ideas, we hope to spark action that will bring forth change for Black communities in the West Midlands. At the very least, we hope that you'll be able to use this letter to start a conversation with other decision makers in the region. We have written this letter because we care, because we have to, because we have little sisters we need to protect, because the time for change is now, and our anger only represents only a fraction of the pain that Black lives, like myself and Olivia, have had to endure for far too long. Anger that should be used as a catalyst to create necessary change in the West Midlands. So, after listening to what we had to say, we hope that more than ever you understand the importance of Black lives, especially young Black lives in the West Midlands, because they do matter. We see that there is a lack of representation within the board, as Councillor Bridget already pointed out. So we challenge you to basically just improve the diversity in the council. Because when you say you stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, you actually need to do something about it. This means not just employing Black, Asian or mixed race men and women for the sake to illustrate visual representation. It means by integrating them into the council because their skills, insight and experience are valued and needed.
to have a platform such as this to speak to decision makers about our worries and concerns is a privilege that many do not get. But something that I would like you all to think about is how it must feel for Iman and I to be the only young Black women in this meeting, to see nobody who looks like us making decisions which will affect our community. We appreciate your support and acknowledgement of the issues at hand, but we want you to know that this is not enough. So, the Young Combined Authority asks for regular updates after each board meeting, addressing the things put in place to combat racial inequality. As well as this, we would like to work alongside portfolio holders to implement tangible change. Thank you for listening.
So Andy, would you like me to respond to that letter?
I was being quiet because I thought that's what was going to happen. Yes.
That's fine. So given that the letter was written to me originally, if I make a response, then Councillor Jones, I know that you probably want to come back as portfolio holder. So the first thing I'd like to say is thank you to Iman and Olivia, and I know it's never easy to present to a meeting like this, and it was very brave, but done incredibly well. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank the Young Combined Authority for taking time to write such a thoughtful letter. And I'd also like to thank you for inviting me to your meeting this week to discuss it in person. So I'm really glad that you've felt able to read this out of the board today, and I think we can all agree that it was a very powerful letter, and it's been important for us to hear. I can also say with confidence that we share yours and the Leadership Commission's commitment to see the West Midlands become a more just and inclusive place. We also recognise that more systemic, proactive and visible action is going to be necessary to eradicate the institutional racism that you very eloquently explained and described to the meeting today. And also it's important that we are able to address some of the structural disadvantage that some of our communities are experiencing at the moment. So following the equalities update that the board has received today, the Combined Authorities Senior Leadership Team is due to consider a set of activities and measures which have been developed partly in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. And these measures will consolidate the existing activity that we're undertaking. And I do want to reassure you that we are doing a number of things already. We're not just waiting for this letter to guide and inform us. We're also going to introduce new actions where it's needed, and we'll make it easier to track progress against equality, diversity and inclusion outcomes across our organisation in particular, but also the work that we do as a combined authority. Some of those proposals are being scoped and considered, and we would really welcome your work alongside us to ensure that you're assured that they're the right actions to take and we're doing them in the right way. So those are, we're going to introduce positive action to encourage more diverse recruitment. We're going to create development opportunities that are targeted specifically towards employees in underrepresented groups. We're going to further embed unconscious bias training for managers and staff. We're going to develop baselines to support the introduction of Black and minority ethnic targets in our procurement and delivery. And we're also going to ensure that our COVID-19 recovery work actively tackles inequalities. So we're prepared to be bold, and some of this will be uncomfortable, I'm in no doubt, but we are also absolutely prepared to be held to account for this. And we'd really welcome the continued challenge and engagement and support from the Young Combined Authority and the Leadership Commission's offer of support in addition to that to help us realise the necessary change that we all appreciate is needed. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah, for responding. And we'll now go back to Councillor Jones.
Thank you. Thank you. Just coming off mute there, thank you. And thank you to Iman and Olivia and to all at the YCA who have put this together. Deborah has outlined what we're going to do going forward. And whilst you may not see a voting member who represents you around the table, I hope that you can see in Deborah an outstanding Black chief executive in her field who is leading work there on the opposite side of the combined authority to deliver some real change for us in this region. And as the portfolio holder, I want to pledge to you that I'll be working alongside her and the other politicians to make sure that we deliver on these pledges to you. I don't know what it's like to be Black. I am not qualified in that area. I do know that punch in the gut, though, that you get from realising that something has happened to you because of a particular characteristic. And I know what it's like to be the only one of something in a room. So I know what injustice feels like. I don't know what your experiences feel like. So my pledge to you is to keep listening, to keep learning, and to keep driving forward to see what we can do to make this change happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I probably went in the wrong order because Councillor Second wanted to come in as well.
No, I think you went in entirely the right order, because I think it was entirely appropriate that Councillor Bridget Jones should respond to that. But you know, I have to say, not wishing to diminish in any way the portfolios who have reported so far today, but what a powerful speech that we've just had. And Olivia, Eman, I think it was fantastic that you presented to us and told us your story, because unless we hear from you, from others, we don't know. And here we are making decisions on behalf of the communities across the West Midlands Combined Authority area, but we need to hear the voices of those communities, and that was very powerful. So I just wanted to, as chair of the Wellbeing Board, I wanted to just, I hope, give a little bit of reassurance that we met last week, and on one of those discussions, I put it to the board that actually one of the most important pieces of work that we should take forward over the next period is around the impact of COVID on Black, Asian and minority groups across the region, and really try to understand how it's impacted in particular communities, and how we might be able to in the future change that, because as we hear, this is not about to go away, and God forbid that it gets any worse. We need to be very ready and prepared to take on that impact. And part of that discussion, I reassured everyone, had to be not just doing a desktop piece of work with our partners, with health colleagues as well, but getting into communities and hearing the voice of those communities about what it's meant to them. So I hope that you will be part of that work as well, because clearly you have a voice that contributes towards our exercise. And as far as any future work is concerned, I would be very happy to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Second. So anybody else like to contribute? I'm not seeing any other hands. So in which case we do need to come back to the recommendations, which on this are on page 199. Obviously, the first two are around specific items, modern slavery and International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And then the third one, in a sense, picks up the very powerful speech that we've heard. And I think inherent in approving that is saying that as an authority, we collectively and determinedly will respond to what we have heard this morning. So hopefully that is a good way of summarising it, other than just to thank Emma and Olivia for the way in which they've spoken to us this morning. Thank you. So do I assume then we have support for those recommendations on page 199? Again, I'm not seeing anything against that. It's great. OK, thank you very much, everybody. In which case we move on to item number 10, 11 and 12, which are 3 transport papers. The first one, a transport system fit to tackle climate change. And I'll pass to Councillor Ward.
Thank you very much. As you say, this is about having a transport system that's fit to tackle climate change. So the report sets out how TFWM will produce and review the local transport plan and confirms the work that's been undertaken on that review thus far. It also discusses how the COVID-19 pandemic and climate emergency will affect the policy context going forward, and it sets out plans for taking forward the review and setting a new vision for transport, which will support the green economic recovery. And that vision is obviously for consultation and further input. The report recognises that transport is critical to supporting access for individuals, families and communities across the West Midlands to the services and opportunities, and it is particularly important for those who are likely to be worst hit by the impacts of the pandemic, including many young, marginalised and vulnerable people who do not have access to a car. On the 5th of June, the board agreed that the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic should be one that supports the ambition for a fairer, greener and healthier West Midlands in the future. And it is a fact that the transport sector accounts for most of the regions and indeed the UK's emissions. Transport emissions, interestingly, have remained broadly unchanged since the 1990s. And most of those emissions are, of course, from cars. So decarbonising transport at a rate that meets the 2041 carbon reduction ambition will not be possible without unprecedented technological and behavioural changes. And those changes, of course, will include infrastructure changes on the highway network if we are to get people to a position where they are less reliant upon cars. There is a risk that the economic recovery from the pandemic will result in high carbon rebound as the persistent modal shift towards cars rather than away from cars is accelerated. And we need to make sure that we're doing all we can to prevent that from happening. And within the report, there is a reference to the interim transport recovery plan, which I'll come to shortly, which is designed to help ensure that we don't see a recovery that drives more people back to cars, if you'll excuse the pun, rather than encouraging more use of cycling and walking. The transport plan itself, or the review of it, sets out 5 motives for change. They are the climate emergency itself to reduce carbon emissions, transport inequality to create a West Midlands where access to and the affordability of transport is more equitable and people are protected from the negative impacts of other people's travel choices. Supporting local communities in places to enable streets to offer wider and more valuable functions than just transport and to support better local amenities and services. And I would expect to see streets and roads in the future being the subject of change so that they are more amenable to cycling and walking, and indeed to afford for temporary road closures in order that communities themselves can take control of their streets in the future. And physical activity to create a region where people can live more actively. So particularly for short journeys, more cycling and more walking. And then finally, sustaining economic success to ensure that people are able to access that which meets their economic, social needs and ambitions. I mentioned that there's a short-term interim transport recovery plan. It is proposed to develop that interim transport plan for the region, setting out short and medium-term actions the region is taking and can take to enable a low carbon green recovery. And through this, we will aim to identify where further regional coordination and collaboration will create opportunities to take further action to provide travel that's safe and secure, get workers and businesses back up and running, support travel to schools, keeping children and families safe, and keep the air clean. The clean air that we've seen during the lockdown when car vehicle movements on the highway network were severely reduced, I think has been welcomed by most people and want to retain as far as we can the cleanliness of our air by reduced carbon emissions and increased physical activity through cycling and walking, all of which should support a green recovery. Now, the plan has been developed by TfWM in partnership with local authorities, and through the Strategic Transport Board there has been consultation with the transport cabinet members or leads across all of the 7 Mets, and that has resulted in a document that we are now ready to launch by the end of this month, which of course is just next week. Returning to the review of the local transport plan itself, the Green Paper prospectus and visioning documents are attached as appendices to this report. The work will require TfM to continue to work with local authorities to develop this new vision for a green and inclusive transport system, to work with all stakeholders across the West Midlands to evolve that vision, and to identify the changes to movement of goods and people that would align with a green and inclusive vision for transport going forward. In terms of governance, it's proposed that the Strategic Transport Board, which I referred to earlier, which has now had 3 meetings, which have all been very, very successful, and there's positive input from cabinet members for transport right across the region. That board will now provide the political oversight and leadership for this review of the local transport plan. The recommendations are set out at the beginning of the report, and I would commend them to the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's see if there's any reaction from colleagues. Looking for hands. I'm not seeing any on this one. So as Councillor Ward's just said, the recommendations are there on page 213. And I assume
Mr. Mayor, I did.
You put your physical hand up. I didn't see that. Okay, Councillor.
Well, I also put a message in the chat box. For some reason, my automatic hand is a bit dodgy. Massively important report here by Councillor Ward, and it's part and parcel of the comprehensive plan we have as a combined authority to take action on the environmental front. I mean, in terms of carbon emissions, transport represents, well, between 30 and 40% of the carbon emissions, but it's one where we have quite a lot of influence, and indeed through our work through our buses and like can take action. But I think the point I want to make here, and a reference actually, is to point 420 on top of page 223. There's a statement there that even if all new cars were electric vehicles by 2035, a 58% reduction in UK car mileage would still be needed. Now, that is an enormous feat. And really the point I want to make is that we can do a lot, but people behaviour was stated in all we've done in the environmental programme as being vital if we're to make progress on a number of these fronts. And people behaviour is referred to in the prospectus, but I would ask that it's elevated in terms of the communications, because it needs a lot more than the action we as a combined authority can take if we're to achieve these targets. As I say, there is a reference on page 243 in the prospectus, but it's fairly lost really, and I think it needs to be elevated much more. But apart from that, totally support the paper.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other hands? No.
Could I
respond?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. The final comment, or the drawing of attention to paragraph 420 by Ian Courts, I do welcome, because I have felt somewhat of a lonely voice in pointing out repeatedly over recent years that moving everyone out of petrol and diesel cars and into electric cars is not the solution. More needs to be done than that. We have to achieve modal shift. We have to get people out of cars onto more sustainable forms of public transport, and for shorter local journeys, more cycling and more walking. So an increase in comms in that area is something that I'm happy to take forward, and I would encourage everybody actually to keep repeating that message. It's not enough to shift people from their current vehicles onto electric vehicles. That will simply not be enough to get us to zero carbon emissions, certainly not on the timescale that's been set by the combined authority. And I also concur with Ian Court's comments around the shift to buses. And it does require infrastructure change as well. We need to be redesigning our roads to give more space to walking and cycling, less space to moving around by cars, and more priority to buses, more spaces for metro, and indeed, actually, the emerging very light rail proposals that are coming out of the city of Coventry. All of these things need to come together if we are going to create a green economic recovery and to have green, economically sustainable public transport in the future. So I welcome those comments from Ian, and again, would commend the recommendations to the board. Thank you.
In which case, should we move to those recommendations on page 213 and 4? I don't see any other contributors, so that is agreed, and we look forward to starting the consultation. Thank you. In which case, item 11, the West Midlands bike share, back to you, Ian.
Thank you. This report provides, again, an overview on progression towards a West Midlands bike share scheme. No doubt board members will be aware that a supplier was appointed back in August of 2018. Unfortunately, that arrangement was terminated in July of 19 because of contract breaches. Following a full review, it's been determined that the client is going to have to inject some funding to make a scheme commercially viable. So we are required to put some public money in here. And the method that we're now adopting is to re-procure via a service contract. Before progressing, the market has been re-engaged to understand the appetite for a scheme for the West Midlands footprint. A supplier day was held back in September of last year, and from that it was recognised that there's no longer an appetite from suppliers to enter into concession agreements to deliver a bike share scheme across the West Midlands. And there is a need to include a proportion of e-bikes within any scheme. None of us are getting any younger. It becomes increasingly difficult, particularly with the hills. So e-bikes, I'm sure, will be widely welcomed. So a procurement was commenced on the 27th of September last year for a service contract to operate the bike share scheme across the West Midlands. The scheme will initially operate over the 7 constituent local authorities, but I want to reassure everyone there is an opportunity for expansion across to the non-constituent local authorities in the future. Following an assessment of the tenders, the successful operator will be informed on August the 3rd, so we're not in a position to reveal the name currently, but once the tenderer has been informed, that will be the case. There will initially be 1,500 bikes within the scheme, of which 150 will be e-bikes. And the contract with the supplier will be for an initial term of 5 years with a possible 3-year extension. The supplier will supply all of the infrastructure and a high quality maintenance regime for the cycles, and will also supply the docking stations over the contract period. Those docking stations won't require electricity input because the e-bikes are powered by interchangeable batteries, and they are the latest generation of hire cycles that are available on the market, and they will, for all bikes, include 3 gears, which hopefully for the non-e-bike users, those will be sufficient to deal with the hills across the West Midlands footprint. Financial implications are also set out within the report. The total cost over the 5 years is some £15.8 million. Board has previously approved £5 million of Transforming Cities funding to be used as a contribution towards that. And this will be supplemented by commercial income from 2 sources: a charge, obviously, for uses of the bicycles, and a corporate sponsorship scheme. Clearly, a scheme of this scale is untested in the West Midlands. We've not had one before, and there remains risk around revenues. So the combined authority will seek to mitigate the risks by taking, first of all, a prudent view on commercial incomes, and also will protect against any downside risk by making financial provision of some 4.6 million over the 5-year period from reprioritised Transport for West Midlands resources. Again, the recommendations are set out at the beginning of the report, and I commend them to the board. Thank you.
Thank you. So any reactions or debate around this? Any contributions? I'm not seeing anybody want to come in on this. Yes, I am. Councillor Bird.
Yeah, as I understand it, obviously having discussed the finances earlier in the agenda, as I understand it, no contract will be signed until the Section 151 officer identifies a budget to be set aside. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Anything else? No. Okay. Nobody else? In which case, we do just need to do this properly, because the recommendations are on page 249, and obviously the critical thing is the budget, and then the delegation of the authority to the officers to take this forward. So do I assume that is agreed then? And please shout up or speak, indicate if you're not comfortable.
Agreed.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I think we take that as jolly good. So excellent. And then the last of the transport projects is item number 12, University Station full business case. And just before Councillor Ward starts, just let me explain one piece of process. Obviously, there's the main paper, but then there is also the private paper with some of the finances in it. I hope we can take a clean decision at the end of the first discussion. So if there is anybody who wants to indicate now that they wish to sort of draw out a piece from the private paper, we'll find a way through that. But I'm hoping to take a clean decision at the end of this conversation. OK, so Councillor Ward. Yeah.
Thank you. Hopefully people will have read in the background to this report that there is a pressing need for the refurbishment of University Station. It was built in 1978. and it was built to accommodate some 400,000 passengers a year. 42 years later, we're in a situation where that station is being used by 4 million passengers each and every year. So it's now a busier railway station than Crewe Station. So there's an urgent need to do something with it, not least because there is an element of risk now for passengers using this station, given the numbers of passengers using it each and every year. Provision of a larger station for the long term is now essential. The improvement to the station facilities and the revised circulation that will assist with the increased level of usage of the station mean that we're now looking at designing a station for 7.2 million people per year. This scheme has formed part of the Combined Authorities Recharge the West Midlands submission to government back in June, and the university station itself is a long-standing priority for all of the stakeholders that are involved. Delivering this scheme will ensure that the station is a gateway for the future and is fit for purpose in a post-COVID world. The financial implications are set out in the report. The tender prices that have come back indicate that a final cost of £56 million is required to transform this station, which is an increase against the original assessment, which was some £43 million. Much of the increase in cost, though, can be set out due to COVID uncertainties and limited competition due to the low number of respondents to the tender. But that in itself, I think, is a result of the COVID emergency. Nonetheless, the scheme still remains viable from an economic perspective. The funding package and costs are set out within the report, but as you've said, Andy, there is a supplement on the private agenda that sets out some more detail around the funding package, and also some more detail over the variations to costs that have led to that revised funding of £56 million as against the original estimate of £43 million. Nobody wants to talk about the private supplement appendix, so I think you're right. We can take a decision here and now in the public agenda, which is far more transparent. Again, the recommendations are set out at the beginning of the report, and I commend them to the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And obviously a significant decision, a lot of work gone into it. So let me see if there's anyone like to contribute. Or is it one of these classic cases where the big expenditures are the least generative of debate? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands at all, in which case I think Councillor Ward has summed it up entirely. The recommendations are on page 259, including the authorisation of the budget to complete the scheme, and the delegation will then go forward to entering into the funding agreements and contracts. So I am again going to look for formal agreement to that. Anyone indicate if they're not happy is the best way of doing it? I'm not hearing any indications. Agreed. In which case, thank you very much. That is agreed. So thank you very much indeed for that. And I think at that point, just say big thank you to the transport team, because obviously 3 significant papers they've been working on for some time there. And thanks to Councillor Ward for those. OK, in which case we come to the minutes, and we will try to do these as swiftly as possible, but I don't want to stop debate. So item 13, Strategic Economic Board. I don't know if Tim Parr wishes to say anything about this.
No, I've got absolutely nothing to add. This is the meeting from the 20th of May. We actually had a meeting yesterday as well, which covered a lot of territory that you've been covering today. And I'll just take any questions if anyone has any.
Not seeing any hands, so thank you. In which case we come to item 14, the Transport Delivery Committee. So Councillor Hartley, anything you want to add?
Yes, so the meeting on the 8th of June gave us the opportunity to really get to grips with what had been going on the network around the region during the emergency. But initially, really looking at passenger safety, service standards, fares, best value fares, the development of that as the demand for the services on all modes change. We've heard about the local transport plan, which is being revised, and the committee will be contributing and looking at the consultation, tracking that around the LTP. Also on the horizon is, or imminent, is a refreshed vision for bus, which will obviously mesh with the local transport plan. At item 17, we discussed a question around reimbursing people with disabilities, older people, young people, for their rail cards, which they've not been able to use during the emergency. Now, a question was raised in the House of Commons a couple of weeks ago, didn't get a full answer, so we've now contacted the DfT and so on to get a clearer answer as to how that reimbursement will actually happen. Apart from that, I think I've covered the key points from that meeting.
Thank you. Any questions, Councillor Hartley?
Yeah, any questions?
Any questions? Not seeing any hands, so that's also noted. Thank you. Item 15 is the Investment Board to Councillor Slay. Anything you want to add?
For noting, Mr Mayor, University Station was referred to the full board and has now been agreed. So that was a recommendation from the Investment Board also.
Brilliant. Thank you. In which case we come to item 16, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and it's the Deputy Chair, Councillor Cathy Baton, who's going to take these today. Councillor Baton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This was obviously our first meeting of the new municipal year, and given the fact that a lot of work was going on behind the scenes in the preparation of reports and presentations, the committee didn't get sight of the relevant data and information really in advance of that committee. So it was very much an overview of the restart plan, as you can see from the minutes. So it's very much for noting. But I do think one of the things that I'd just like to highlight for the future in terms of when we're setting our work plan, which we'll pick up in item 20, is about in respect of social recovery of the region, as well as the economic recovery of the region. And we've heard today as to why that is just so important for us. The body of the report is for noting, as is the scrutiny review around the new transport scrutiny arrangements, and that is also for noting. And obviously we've got the more up-to-date report at item 20.
Coming to that. Lovely. Thank you. And just technically that was an in-quorum meeting, so we do just need to formally agree those, which I take as done. Thank you. In which case, item 17 is the said board of June, and back to you, Tim. I presume nothing similarly to add?
No, I'll again take any questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, and as before, no hands, in which case we come to Environment Board, item 18, and that's with Councillor Courts. Ian?
Nothing to add, particularly happy to take questions. It was an important meeting as it discussed taking forward a lot of the actions on the environmental agenda, but happy to take questions.
And the invitation doesn't appear to have any takers, so that's great, thank you. In which case we go to 19, Housing and Land Board, Councillor Bird.
Nothing to add, is for noting, only to confirm that the first tranche of monies from the Brownfield Land Fund will be with us September. So we have now got confirmation of that 84 million coming our way. And obviously that will be earmarked for a programme of Brownfield land development, including Moxley Iron Park. Thank you, Councillor Ward.
Oh, he never misses a chance.
Oh,
yes, okay. All right, but thank you to you and your team for all the lobbying over that as well. So that's great. Okay, lovely. In which case, client number 20 is back to you, Cathy Baton. Cathy, yeah.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So again, the main body of the meeting took place, and that was really around the restart programme. So those are for noting. I think the one comment the committee would perhaps want to make is to reassert to the board the importance that the recovery plan does meet the needs of our very diverse communities. I think we noted that we felt that there were a couple of or some omissions in the restart programme around certain sectors, so that we hope to pick that up at future meetings. Moving on to the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee, and again, as this meeting was in Court, the board will need to note the reference for the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee. Well, there are 5 recommendations, so the board will need to agree those 5 recommendations. The forward plan will be developed over the coming weeks, and as I said in the last report, that will align to the restart programme for the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Extremely clear. And as Kathy's just said, it was an in-quorum meeting, so we need to endorse those notes with the piece about the Transport Subcommittee governance. Okay, please. I'm not seeing any objections to that. Thank you then. Thank you, Kathy. In which case we come to 21, which is the Young Combined Authority notes. And I'm not sure if either Emma or Olivia are still on the line and want to say anything about this.
Still here. I'm still here. Simone.
Lovely. Far away.
Just really quickly, everything that I'm about to say is something that Councillor Bridget-Jones already highlighted. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting with you, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Bridget-Jones about, you know, our concerns about the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic on young people. They want to say thank you for listening to our concerns. And we're also addressing how there's been like some positives despite everything. You know, like our environment's getting slightly better because, you know, we've had a chance to breathe in that sense. And how some people are finding, you know, the balance between work and well-being. And we were also asked to talk about the priorities that we think should be for the community, and those have been shared with the Regional Recovery Coordination Group. And yeah, just the Black Lives Matter letter and sharing it with you guys today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Any further questions or observations for Emma? No, so that's all noted as well. And then item number 22, just to do it technically correctly, is of course the going into the private session. And if there is anybody on the line